Hello and welcome back to another episode of the MBA Success Podcast. Today we're lucky enough to host not one, but two guests. Our first guest is Jeremy Galbreath. Jeremy is an esteemed individual whose expertise traverses the realms of both academia and business. With an impressive track record of key roles in Fortune 500 companies and a couple of high-tech startups in the USA, Jeremy brings a wealth of experience to our conversation. Currently, Jeremy applies his strategic acumen in his role as Director of Strategy at Ecope International and provides insightful strategy consultancy work. But that's just one side of the coin. From the high-stakes, fast-paced corporate world, Jeremy made a noteworthy transition to academia. He now shapes the strategic thinkers of the future in his capacity as an Associate Professor at Curtin University in Perth, Western Australia. Jeremy, thank you for your time. It's truly a privilege to have you here today.
Ross, thank you very much. It's my pleasure to be here. Looking forward to it.
Me too. And as we move along, we have our second guest today. It is Hamun Arya, a fellow board member of MBA Australasia. Now, Hamun, your LinkedIn profile is somewhat modest, leaving much to our imagination. I certainly wouldn't want to misrepresent any aspect of your journey, so I'm happy to let you introduce yourself and what you currently do and where you studied.
Thanks, Ross, and thanks, Jeremy, for joining us today. I look forward to this interview and session. Ross, great opportunity to be here and talking about the MBA and how has helped myself in developing and transitioning into my new career. So I am in a startup business and driving different startups in Australia, mainly in wine and food businesses, and really looking on how we can challenge the current business models and retails and drive more sustainable packaging. So with that, I give the word to yourself, and I will perhaps dive in and talk more about what we are doing in Ecope International further in the conversation.
Yeah, as we get to that. Yeah, absolutely. All right. So, Jeremy, tell us a little bit about yourself, where you grew up and where you're from. You obviously have an accent.
I definitely do. A lot of times I'm asked if I'm Canadian. I am not Canadian. I'm from the United States, originally from the Midwest. So the Midwest includes states like Indiana, Ohio, Illinois, Michigan, Iowa. Those kind of Midwestern farm communities. And I was born originally in the state of Michigan in a town called Ann Arbor. Some of you might have heard of the university called the University of Michigan, which is one of the top public universities in the United States. That's where I was born. My mother was a student there, and my father was working there at the time. But shortly thereafter, we moved to a very, very small town called Winchester, Indiana, which is probably about 2 hours roughly from Indianapolis. So the famous Indianapolis 500. I grew up maybe an hour and a half, 2 hours drive from Indianapolis in a very small town of 2,000-3,000 people, very much a farm community, a little bit of industrial kind of manufacturing around the automotive sector. But that's where I was raised. And then from there, if you want me to maybe talk a little bit more about the progression, sure. From there, I didn't actually go to university until I was 21 years old. So sort of a late bloomer. And I went to a university in Indiana, and then eventually took a position with a company called AT&T, which is, I still think, the largest telecom company in the United States. At one stage, it was the largest company in the world. I think it employed over 1 million people, a private company. There's a whole large history behind that, but nonetheless, I took a position up at AT&T in Chicago, Illinois, and loved Chicago. If you haven't been there, you must go. It's a fabulous Midwestern town. But I was only there for a short period of time, maybe roughly a year, because I had an opportunity to do a transfer to Denver, Colorado. And I took that opportunity with gusto because I love the mountains. And so I moved to Denver. This was early 1990s, and continued to work for AT&T in Colorado, really right up until I made this transition to move to Australia and work on a PhD and then transition into academia. So that's very a quick nutshell of my background and where I'm from.
Excellent. And so now in your current capacity as an associate professor at Curtin, how did you become, how was Australia a, potential destination
Yes.
and Curtin and why sort of professor teaching strategy?
Interesting story. So actually my background in what I call corporate America. So obviously these corporate professional roles that I had were very much around business development and strategy development. So I had a career in strategy development, everything from, acquisitions. I did a lot of mergers and acquisitions. I did in terms of my career progression. So after I completed an MBA, and maybe we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute, I did leave AT&T and I joined a couple of startups. In fact, I helped start up a company. This was at the height of the dot-com era. So I'm showing my age here. But I lived through that experience of the dot-com era. Now, for those of you who know anything about the dot-com era, around 2001, 2000, things went very south very quickly. And so I was actually out of work, right? So the startup didn't fold, but those of us who weren't in revenue generating roles, you were basically shown the door. And I had decided that it was time for a bit of a sea change, and personally and professionally. I had been to Australia, by the way, previously because I love tennis. I'm a huge tennis fan. So I came to the Australian Open in 1996 in Melbourne and just fell in love with Australia. And I thought, you know what? Although I had a lot of international experience, I had quite a bit of international travel, but I had never lived overseas. And I thought, now's my opportunity. I must not only live overseas, but work overseas. And so I decided that I'm going to pursue my doctorate in Australia. And I applied to, I think, 5 unis, ended up getting an offer from Curtin University in Perth, which was kind of the last university on my target list. But in the end, they had the best offer, an offer that I couldn't refuse. And so I wound up in Perth in 2002. And then I began my journey of completing my PhD in strategic management, which is kind of a logical extension of my professional career. And then once that was completed, within, I think, a year, I took up a full-time academic position at Curtin University. And so I've been there, literally been here ever since.
Yeah. And do you remember who won the Australian Open back in 96?
Yes, I do. Boris Becker. It was his last, and by the way, 2. So Monica Seles won the ladies, last time she ever won a Grand Slam, and Boris Becker, the last time he ever won a Grand Slam as well. So I felt a little honored to be able to see those 2 champions win their final Grand Slams.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's a cool memory. And so had you ever had any ambitions to become, a teacher or a professor or anything like that?
Just before that? Maybe a little. I mean, there have been ideas in my head that, I might have an interest downstream in terms of possibly an academic career. So I'd say it was bubbling in the mind. But certainly through circumstances, I moved into that space much quicker than I would have imagined. But to be fair, I've been doing this for 20 years now, and I'm retiring at the end of this year. I feel like I've kind of reached, I hate to say the word limit, but I feel like I've made my contribution academically, and now I'm at an age where it's time to move on and start another chapter. And so I'll be retiring this year. But it's been a really great 20 years teaching, and I've been exclusive on MBAs. I have never taught undergraduates, only MBA and executive education. So I've been privileged to be able to, as I think we mentioned earlier, kind of train up, as Hamoon mentioned, train up and skill up MBA students, particularly in the area of entrepreneurship and strategy. And it's been an absolute pleasure and privilege to do that.
Yeah, I can imagine over that time span, you would have seen some pretty impressive people come through the program and go and do some
absolutely
cool things.
I mean, all kinds of really diverse group, as you can imagine. Of course, being in Perth, we get a lot of resources sector people, but people from governments, people from nonprofits, entrepreneurs. Case in point with Hamoon, I've been involved in other startups. My students who've come through my entrepreneurship units, who I've helped in the past launch their own businesses. So I've always, as an academic, I've never had my hand out of the industry side because I feel that's critically important in the classroom, right? So I've always had a connection with industry one way or another, but it wasn't until maybe the last eight years or so that I really got more involved in terms of helping my students start up businesses. And that's just been a real privilege and thrill for me to be able to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. So going back to your MBA studies,
Yes.
when did you and where did you complete yours?
Again, this is going back many, many years. I finished my MBA in 1999. Now that was
Mhm.
while I was living in Colorado State University. So Colorado State University is based in Fort Collins, which is about 2 hours north of Denver, but they had an executive education program in the city of Denver. So that's where I took that course. And that was a 2 year full-time executive ed program. So I was working full time and working and doing an MBA full time. So it was a very um, interesting 2 years, to say the
Yeah.
least.
Yeah. And so you were in business development stuff. You were sort of already in that strategy space when you
That's
decided
right.
to do that. And
That's right.
so when you were looking at that, were you thinking about the opportunities internally for, your career? Were you looking to shift it a little bit sideways? What was sort of the motivating factor there?
Yeah, look, to be honest, it was driven by the company that I worked for. So I had colleagues that I worked with in the strategy development group who had been through an MBA as well.
Yeah.
You know, told me a little bit about the advantages of that, particularly in my stage of my career. And kind of the idea was, at least in corporate America at the time, and it probably is still the case, if you want to move up in corporate America, you better have an MBA, right? It was just that's a calling card. Otherwise, there's too much competition, right?
Yeah.
So my boss had approached me and said, Jeremy, look, we see potential in you. If you want to make a name for yourself, if you want to build a career here, you want to move up the ranks, as it were, you really need to have an MBA. And by the way, we're happy to pay for that. So it's like case closed. Okay, no problem. So I launched into the MBA and absolutely thrilled that I was able to do that. But fortunately for me, that was paid for by the company. That was one of the perks for working in a very large, very profitable organization. So they were very keen on taking the best talent and getting them educated, and they were happy to pay for that. So it worked out really well.
How does that feel? I guess at that point in your career to have that sort of management team around you recognize that in you and give you that opportunity.
That was great. I mean, I had thinking back again, that's going back many years, but thinking back in my bosses, my immediate boss, and then the CEO or the managing director of the business unit that I was working for, I'm very close to them and still am, by the way. So very good mates. To have that kind of support is it's hard to beat that. Right.
Mm.
So that was, and it gave me a lot more confidence as well, because I've got people, my superiors who believe in me enough that they're willing to flip the tab to pay for me to go to get an MBA. Now, as we all know, MBAs aren't cheap. Right. So that was, that was a real privilege to be able to do that. And I still have students today where companies are doing the same. It's the same model, right? They will not every company, but certainly some companies will pay for a select group of people to go get an MBA, people that they really see are top talent and want them to progress and move up an organization. They're still willing to pay for some students to go back to school and get their MBA, which to me is a great model.
Jeremy, one of the questions I want to ask you is, the transition from not having the education as MBA and working for the same company, and then you go into that journey of learning MBA. You are equipped with new knowledge, strategies, and understanding the business arena. Could you please take us through that journey? How that MBA equipped you with the tools and how you could implement it into the real life?
Well, I think, unfortunately, my journey was very short. So when I completed my MBA, within a year, I had left, right, and done a couple of startups. So that was unexpected. Mm-hmm. But nonetheless, looking back, not only my professional experience, but also the MBA knowledge that I had, that was incredibly valuable in these startup organizations, right? As Hamoon, you would well know that, right? So you think about, of course, not every MBA is exactly the same, but certainly a lot of the models, frameworks, tools that you're equipped with as an MBA student. I was able to leverage and use those now in a startup position, right? Because we were definitely doing acquisitions, for example. So a lot of the finance units came into play and were extremely beneficial. And I had no background in finance, right? So you've got to understand the numbers when you're doing M&A activity. But also it gave me a better sense of, I think, kind of the leadership side as well, what it takes to actually lead and run a startup organization. And so that MBA gave me really good knowledge, but not just knowledge, some of the frameworks and tools and models that I needed to actually get into a startup and make that startup successful. And so that was probably what I gained the most of, because again, I didn't go back to, I was only within AT&T for just a very short period of time before I launched. Because why? Because my boss and my boss's boss, we were the ones that did the startup, right? So I joined them on the journey, but I was able to use that knowledge and expertise, not only that I gained from the MBA, but also from my own professional experience as well. So it worked out really well.
And do you remember what some of those frameworks were that you were using at the startup? And
that's a few. So things like, the classic discounted cash flow. I mean, all the kind of financial models that you look at, particularly when you're valuing a company. So Hamoud and I have had this discussion previously about how do you value a startup, right? Particularly if it has no revenue. So just using some of those classic tools that you learn in finance, if you're doing an internal project, so IRR, net present value, discounted cash flows, all those kinds of frameworks. Probably on the strategy side, look, I think I had probably learned already prior to my MBA most of the strategy frameworks that were available at the time, simply because of my own position, right? Yep. But there were, I think there were a few that I would have gleaned as well from that unit, of course, accounting, things like that. So again, it was more for me probably on the number side, because I was a non-numbers person, right? And so as difficult as it was for me to learn the finance side, to learn the accounting side, and then actually apply that in a startup situation, particularly around startups, and just running the startup day to day in terms of cash and how do you manage cash and things like that. Yeah. That was really beneficial.
Awesome. Anything else on that, Hamoud?
No, that is a very interesting journey, and it brings me a question about Jeremy. Now you have been studying MBA in US, but also been teaching MBA in Australia. How do you see the MBA equipping the middle managers and senior managers? Because most of the time, people in the classroom are around the mid-manager positions, and they are looking to be equipped. How do you see that bringing benefit, especially looking at the resources sector in WA, and how the industry is gaining benefit of having leaders, current and future leaders, equipped with background of MBA?
Yeah, look, I think things are so complex in this day and age, even definitely more so than when I was in the United States and working in business there. Is one of the things that I really try to do personally, and I think probably some of my colleagues do, is really get this idea around systems thinking, right? So rather than seeing just little individual parts, we need to see how parts work together. And so I think what the MBA equips students today is, because we all come in with some kind of specialization, whether that's you're a marketing person, you're a supply chain person, you're a finance person. When you complete an MBA, you broaden the horizon, you broaden the scope. So, right, it's not just I'm doing an MBA in finance or I'm doing a master's in finance. An MBA is more generalist. So you get a broader view of the organization. How does an organization actually need to work together around all these various disciplines and functions? Of course, there's the strategy layer at the top, but how does that flow down in terms of getting the organization to work together as a whole? And so if I come in as an engineer, if I come in as a finance person, I'm getting a much broader perspective of the other components of an organization and how they need to work together to actually get results. And so that, to me, I think is a big takeaway that most students would walk away with, or at least I would hope they would walk away with. It broadens the field of scope. And when we think about how complex things are today, now you've got the whole sustainability argument coming in, right? So in my day, we didn't talk about sustainability. We only talked about making money, making profits. Not that that's not important. Not that we still don't need to consider that. Of course we do. But you've got it's much broader now in terms of the expectations around the society, even, and government certainly place on business. And so if I'm going to manage and lead an organization today, a business today, you better have a broader view, but not only a broader view, but how do things all work together? So it's not just seeing one little individual slice, it's seeing the whole part, all the parts and how they work together. So I think modern MBAs are delivering that, and that's something that MBA students can walk away with, which will serve them well, by the way, down the future in their careers.
I'm curious, just to go backwards a little bit to something you said when you were doing your MBA, and there was that mentality around if you want to progress, you need to have an MBA because it's so competitive that's sort of what's going to help you stand out and obviously give you some really helpful skills. But I don't see that sort of mentality here in Australia to quite that same level. What's your take on Australia's view of the MBA degree, from the corporate space?
Yeah, it's probably not the same. I think because the U.S. is just so unbelievably competitive, right? Not that Australia is not competitive. Don't misunderstand me. But I think you multiply that, many times when you work in the United States. So I'm not sure that the MBA is necessarily as prized as much as it is in other parts of the world here in Australia, which to me is a shame. But probably in my 20 years, I think that has changed. I think there is increasingly a recognition that if we want to not only hire or attract top talent and keep top talent, we need to have the best skill set that we can get. And by the way, that includes postgraduate education and an MBA. In terms of business, of course, that's kind of the prize. So I think there is more and more recognition for that. And I think there's also, again, just talking to my students over the course of 20 years, I think there's more and more, based on their feedback, there is more and more recognition from what I call corporate Australia that MBAs are of value. It might not be to the point where everybody's willing to pay, every company's willing to pay for an employee to go get an MBA. But I think that's changed. I think there is more of an appetite now, especially because we're so international as well, right? So, I mean, even when I came here 20 years ago, I would suggest that the international scope of Australia has definitely deepened and broadened in my 20 years here. And if you're going to compete internationally, particularly from a human capital perspective and from a talent perspective, you need the best educated people. There's no question about it. And I think those businesses in Australia that do operate internationally, they recognize that. So I would suggest maybe not quite the demand that you might see in the United States, but I think it's better than it used to be.
Yeah, awesome. So let's turn the conversation quickly to Ecope International and I guess talk to you guys about the work you're doing and how the MBA has helped you, Hamun, in developing this startup, and then you, Jeremy, in helping provide that strategic sort of lens to the business as well. So, Hamun, do you want to, talk to your journey so far in starting it up, and what you might have done differently if you didn't have an MBA, and what you have since you've had it, and all those bits and pieces?
Oh, absolutely. Ross, my background was from shipping, and my education was master mariner. So as Jeremy touched base earlier upon, was I had in the background of finance, I had in the background an understanding of marketing, but I always wanted to have my own company and make a change, create a positive impact. I was extremely passionate about that. So in 2019, I decided to take a step back from my professional career, and I was working as a management consultant within oil and gas in that time in Europe, in Sweden, to pursue of learning and understanding the business as a bigger umbrella. What Jeremy mentioned earlier, to understand the different departments and different operations of an organization, how bits and pieces work together. So I moved to Perth because Perth was a place where I worked as an expat within oil and gas industry previously, and I enjoyed the weather very much. So sun was shining compared to the gray sky in Sweden. So it was a great opportunity for me to come here. And we decided together with the family, we moved just before COVID started to Perth. And as I started my journey of MBA, my goal was to be able to start my own company at the end of the MBA. I wanted to give myself that opportunity and see if it is practical possible. So I came across Jeremy's unit in internationalization and entrepreneurship. And that was an amazing, interesting unit, which I enjoyed most during my MBA journey, because that was very nicely fit with my own passion and my interest. So we talk about that Australia as a country is not as competitive as US. And that is very interesting because I see huge opportunities in Australia, which I wouldn't be able to actually tap into in current European market. So if you look at current European business arena, especially Sweden, where I'm coming from, you will find huge unicorn and startups popping off in Stockholm every day, every week. You have companies like Volvo, you have companies like Ericsson, you have companies like ABB, Tetra Pak, Spotify, Klarna, and you name it. So the opportunity really for the country is to value add and generate revenue and GDP through the value add. Now, if you look at Australia, I could just look at lots of industries and identify the opportunities. One of them was wine industry. So Australia and especially WA offering great wines, great premium wines. However, most of them, especially in WA, is smaller producers and lacking the time and experience of marketing, business, and internationalization to get their products into the international competition and the market. Mm-hmm. With my background connected to Sweden, I saw a great opportunity of two markets. One is not able to create wine and make wine because of the weather and the climate, and the other one being one of the leading countries. Jeremy had a huge experience, not only in the strategy and MBA and how you can drive and start a business, but also he has done amazing hard work within the wine industry. So I could sort of gain that experience and understanding of the wine industry and use it in the startup. So I pitched two different ideas to Jeremy. It was a late evening after entrepreneurship session, and the feedback was very clear that the wine opportunity was better, looking from different aspect of the investment required, etc. And we started that. We started just a company simply to help Australian and Western Australian wine producers to get their products to the international market, especially the Nordic and Scandinavian market, which is very sophisticated. Mm-hmm. So with that, I ping-ponged back to Jeremy to sort of take the journey from his point of view, where we started. I had no idea and no clue about different grape varieties and wines. So for me, a Cabernet Sauvignon or Pinot was red wine in that time. So gaining that knowledge, but also starting a business. And we had the COVID at the same time. Yep. So definitely MBA helped me to understand how you build a business and how you drive and build that relationship with your customers and stakeholders, but also how you tackle challenges and you diversify your business as the challenges arise.
Yep. So, Jeremy, this is obviously an area of your expertise. How do you approach, evaluating an opportunity like this and deciding whether it's something that you want to get involved in?
Well, first, I think it does come down to the person, right? I mean, obviously, I'm looking for somebody who, I tend to think I can read people pretty well. I mean, again, I'm 60 years old, right? So I've been around for a while. I think I can read people reasonably well. So it's getting to know the person, and is the feeling there, right? Do you have a connection? So that's certainly important from my perspective. But also, one of the things that I've done over many, many years, because I can't tell you how many students and people who aren't students, just maybe acquaintances who've come to me, Jeremy, I've got this great idea. What do you think? And of course, the first thing I ask them is there another competitor already doing it? Mm-hmm. And 9 times out of 10, they'll say, I don't know. I haven't looked. I don't know. So it's this idea of, is there really a gap in the market? And because I've been studying as a researcher the wine industry in Australia for 15 years. I know it very well, and I'm very well connected. I mean, all the way to the top levels of government. So I knew, based on the idea that Hamoon was kind of pitching at the time, that there was definitely, even though I felt it was a niche opportunity, and I still think it's a niche opportunity, particularly when we're talking about Sweden. But there's enough of an opportunity to have a crack, and so that's the way that I kind of weighed it up. Plus, I've just got a passion for WA wine as well, so I decided that's a really good fit for my expertise and my network, and I can certainly help Hamoon out and actually help get this business on the ground. And look, at the end of the day, we've proved the business model. It hasn't been easy. We've certainly had some challenges, and Hamoon has done obviously 100 times more work than I have. But it works, right? We're selling wine there. We're exporting wine there. We've made networks. We've got connections, and it's working. And we've proven that we can actually start a business and have it actually operating and functioning and generating revenue. And that's a really good feeling.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, Hamoon, you made the mention that you were doing your MBA with the intention of starting up a business. You obviously weren't quite sure what that business was when you started. Was that one of the driving, motivating factors? Is that like the key thing that, hey, I want to be an entrepreneur and I want to do my own thing?
Absolutely, it was. And as you say, Ross, I wasn't clear what the opportunity would be. And what product or industry I would tap into, but I was very determined that I would like to try and start my own business. And really, everything started just from the simple idea, and I think that is the very typical entrepreneurial journey, where you look at an opportunity and you believe in that opportunity and you start building your journey and the business just based on understanding and idea. However, when I was doing the MBA, it was not only that I believe in the idea, it was the strategies, it was the understanding of the market, of the different international markets and the opportunities, which could give that confidence and verification and validation that it is possible to do it. So without an MBA, Ross, I think I wouldn't feel confident enough to start the journey. I'm very sure about it, because before having MBA, I had also ideas, and I believed in many different products, but I hadn't the confidence enough to do it. So MBA gave me that confidence, but also the understanding of doing. So what we did was, I say, putting the knowledge into practice. So every single unit which I studied at MBA was used in my company to improve and validate the concept which we were believing in, me and Jamie. So starting from one small winery in Swan Valley region, knocking the door and asking if that winemaker was willing to export his wine to Sweden. We ended up being one of the finalists of Exporters of the Year in Western Australia. We managed to sign on a biggest deal of white wine export from WA to Europe. And that was, as Jeremy mentioned, a validation that the concept is working, but also that we have huge opportunities in Australia. There is lots of space to tap into and add value and bring the products from Australia not only to the Asia, which is from geological point of view is close to us, but there are lots of other markets which would appreciate Australian brands and Australian products.
So this a question for either of you, whoever wants to jump in. There's obviously the element of having the confidence and being able to go, okay, there's a bit of a problem I need to solve, and do apply some frameworks and some models to it to get the information you need to do it. But then there's the execution element to it, to the point that you actually have to go and start knocking on some doors. What do you think it's parts of the MBA that give the motivation to do the actual doing? Or is there, what is it that you see there in terms of, because, you can have the idea and go, okay, this looks like a good idea. but then actually going and fulfilling that is another question altogether.
Very great question. I'm gonna go back and say the confidence, because in my own journey, if I go back and have a look, there've been lots of challenges, and if I hadn't the support of Jeremy and his knowledge, but also my own understanding and validation of the MBA, that this is just part of the challenge and it is common in a startup. So you are now heading this stage and phase of the startup, and you have the challenge to manage it, and not a failure that you are not able to do it. That gives the confidence and determination to keep going, because you know where you are heading. You understand that where you stand is part of the startup journey. It's part of the business, and it is up to you to go back to your strategies, which we did a lot. I think in the beginning of the journey, me and Jeremy, we had lots of strategy sessions, updating and changing the strategies as we start growing and finding products. So again, I think that is the confidence and giving you the understanding of business and how it works, especially during the startup phase.
Yeah, what it makes me think about is, you before thinking or approaching a situation, it's all just chaos, right? It's all complex. It seems very challenging to get your head around it, but doing the work that you've done provides a level of order and understanding to the situation, which allows you to then create that path to navigate your way through it. And obviously then that gives you the confidence to actually execute. And I really like that. That sounds really cool.
I guess one other comment I'm going to make is, and I know that when I teach entrepreneurship, I rely a lot on Steve Jobs. So obviously now deceased, but the founder, or one of the founders of Apple, to me, arguably the world's greatest business leader. He famously said once, the number one characteristic of a good entrepreneur is perseverance. Mm-hmm. And so I'm not sure you can teach that, but certainly if you're doing an MBA and working, even if you're not working, you got to be perseverant, right? To get through an MBA. It's not easy, and especially if you're working full time. So I think, there's probably something to be said about going through an MBA, taking on that responsibility. As I think Amon said, over time you begin to build that confidence, but also, there's an end goal, right? So you have to persevere to make it to the end goal. And any entrepreneur, and I think Amon would agree with this, if you can't persevere, you might as well not even start, because you're going to face challenges. You're going to have to deal with a lot of risk, a lot of unknowns. But if you persevere and you're confident in what you're trying to achieve, I think you can do anything. And I think we've proven that, certainly with this particular business.
Yeah, absolutely. I just finished listening to the audiobook of Steve Jobs' biography. And it actually made me think, when you were talking about the systems thinking side of things, that was a big thing that Steve obviously loved, right? He loved controlling the system in which users experienced Apple products and thinking about it holistically. And, it's really not funny, but it's, there's not too many Apple-like companies that have been able to, keep their, borders closed so tightly like they've done it. But God, they've done it so well. Whilst you looked at the main rivals for a long time, Microsoft didn't do that, and obviously took the exact opposite approach, and have had very similar outcomes at the end of the day, being huge companies. Yeah,
indeed.
We're definitely getting close to the end. I don't want to take up too much of your time. And maybe this could be a double barrel question, given that you're both here. But Jeremy, I'll start with you. What's your definition of success?
That's a very good question. I tend to be, and I always have been, and I think part of it is driven because of my American, being raised in an American culture where being number one is all that counts. Nothing else matters. Number one, you must be number one. Number two, nobody cares about number two. Nobody remembers who came in second place. It's always about being number one. So I've been very achievement orientated. So probably for me, how do I define success? to be frank, I define it in terms of achievement. So whether I'm an academic, is it how much research I produce, how much grant income I bring in, how many citations I get, those kinds of things. I'm all about delivering results. I don't like a lot of talk and a lot of waffle. What I like is results. So for me, success is very results oriented. Now, look, it may that result may look different depending on who you are. But I think success for me is very much about achieving, about delivering results that matter. And so that's how I define success.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing. Hamun, you've had a little bit of time to think about it. How about yourself?
Absolutely. I got that opportunity, and it is a great and very hard question, Ross. I think from my own point of view, for me, is about trying and testing ideas, what you believe in. Now, whether that is successful or not, the time and the journey of life gonna show it. But I think the important thing is that we have a certain time of living in this planet, and testing and believing in what you are doing and trying to create a positive impact is what I would see as successful.
Excellent. Awesome. Thanks for sharing. Well, it's been a great episode. I've enjoyed thoroughly talking to both of you. I feel like it's both about Ecope International and, your background, Jeremy, and all the things that you've done. We could probably go on for a lot longer than listeners would probably care to pay attention for. But no, I appreciate that. For all the listeners that are out there, again, our MBA Oz Awards for 2023 are open. So we've got 6 categories open for this year. So head to the mbaoz.com.au website for nomination entry details. This is a bit of a curveball that I'm going to throw these guys, but we have some member exclusive content that we put up only for members who are on our member up platform. So become a member, stick around, and you'll get some insightful information from there. But again, gentlemen, thank you very much for coming on and spending some time with me today.
Pleasure.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.